Gibraltar is blessed with a rich variety of natural and human history. The rock and the town below have been home to many cultures and people over the centuries. The artifacts, monuments and memories that remain become our heritage, a common inheritance which we all share. And as Gibraltar moves forward and grows, it is up to us as a society to make sure this heritage endures and becomes a part of our future as well. Leading this effort is the Gibraltar Heritage Trust, an independent statutory body entrusted with the preservation of our heritage, whose aim it is to ensure that modern Gibraltar retains history and heritage at its heart. The site of the old town, huddled and nestled under the Moorish castle, is one of the most iconic views of the Rock. Gibraltar's old town tells the story of Gibraltarian culture, its winding streets, tight alleys, close neighbourly interactions, a love for community, all framed by the characteristic louvered shutters and period colonial architecture. The Mediterranean temperament dwelling within the walls of Anglo-style construction. The unique sights and views of the old town has inspired artists through the generations. The motley images of a multicultural walled city and the tightly packed rooftops, all evocative of the town perched on the western slopes of the ancient Rock. Through the years, the growing population of Gibraltar has spread to other new areas, made accessible through advances in engineering such as reclamation. Such projects saved the old town from the pressures of a growing population in the 1990s, but at the same time directed attentions elsewhere, allowing many areas to fall into dilapidation. But Gibraltar's old town is beginning its second life. With many buildings abandoned and falling into neglect, a new generation of Gibraltarians has taken the initiative to breathe life back into this iconic and beloved area, the heart of our old town and the soul of Gibraltar. One such site are the buildings known as HIJ on Castle Road. Once associated with the Police Barracks and home to many Gibraltarian families, these dilapidated edifices are undergoing an intense redevelopment program to salvage the charm of this historic building and bring them back to life as homes once again.
The buildings are a typical set of buildings that you find in Gibraltar's Old Town. They're a series of 3 different buildings. From Castle Street itself, it just looks like your typical arched door opening and your timber window arrangement. And then when you come in, it opens up into a verandaed courtyard over a number of levels. The building itself has been through a number of iterations with extra floors proposed for the top, parts of the building proposed to be demolished, and we've always tried to resist that. And I think where we are today is quite a good balance between all of that.
I'm Ghislaine De Lupiani. I am the developer on the project along with a team of people. My background is project management and other areas of construction. The other shareholders approached me almost 2 years ago now to say that they'd identified a site in the old town that they thought I would really enjoy working on, because they know that one of my passions in development and one of the things I try and do is not to just be led by the commercial aspect of development, but the needs of Gibraltarians. I'm Gibraltarian and I care about what we build, so I tend not to get involved in projects that I don't believe in. Well, this building has nearly got me the sack twice because I've taken 2 years with my colleagues to come up with a scheme that's been commercially viable for the shareholders, for the investors, but also preserving the building, because the easiest thing to do is to demolish. Once you start from scratch, you don't find pipes that you weren't expecting or, structural defects that sometimes you only find as you go along. So initially we went to planning in December 2017 and obtained full planning. Got very excited about beginning to market the project and then realized that the numbers just didn't work and we would have to demolish the building because there was no structural solution.
My name is Jonas Tau. I work for Arc Designs. We've been the architects leading on the design and coordination of the project since its inception, really, which dates back now over a year because of the iterative process that we've gone through in terms of discussing with all the stakeholders how best to address it and developing the design along the way with several different approaches. Well, specifically, I would say on this site, as much as several other buildings in the upper town, it's a logistical issue as much as anything, in the sense that the buildings are in very poor state of repair. They often need quite substantial refurbishment in order to make them usable again, but in an area where access for contractors, vehicular, etc. is all very limited. The first aspect of it is kind of understanding what we have to work with. So we had to, in the case of this building, uncover what there was here in the first place. The building was pretty much used as a dumping ground for the area. So several weeks, if not months, were spent just clearing up rubble and debris that was in here, resurveying the building so that we've got precise drawings to work from in terms of understanding the space. And then it's that sort of iterative process of discussing with engineers, contractors, the client team, developer discussions also with Heritage Trust, with the planners, in terms of understanding how we can best address the building and trying to maintain the main design aims that we have in mind in terms of maintaining these buildings in the first place, because that's a question that you have to go through as well, which is whether it's worthwhile maintaining the existing building or not. And once you identify that, yes, you would like to do that, how do you do that in a way that is economically feasible, acceptable from a planning perspective? What are the heritage elements that we're looking to preserve? And how do we make the building safe and accessible for modern living?
We've to and froed on the project for almost 2 years, been paying for scaffolding, consultants, etc., and had consulted Heritage about demolishing the building, which was breaking the Chief Executive Officer's heart and mine. We decided as a team that we would give it one last shot. So we went off and tried to find international expertise in cities that have a lot of refurbishment, so like Krakow, like Warsaw, like Brussels, even London, Lisbon, cities that are used to working in very tight spaces and in saving and having very strict heritage laws. And we finally approached Claire and said, look, we actually think we've come up with a way to make the project viable. And in line with the way we work, we've called up building control, we've called up town planning. They've been very helpful, they've been very solution orientated. And we're quite confident that working closely with them, we're going to save this building. And we're going to actually create a building with a colonial feel.
Well, we're here between the first 2 blocks of the buildings. As you can see, that it's a building that is in quite a dilapidated state of repair. Like so many buildings in the old town, what it's had is piecemeal additions and changes done over time, which also means that both the heritage aspect of it, or what we're trying to preserve, has been somewhat compromised. So there's layers that we need to uncover to get back to really the essence of what the buildings would have been originally. But also the fact that in some cases that poses a structural challenge that is an additional element that needs to be overcome. This is one example, being where the walkway would have originally gone continuously externally. You can tell that the residences over time have built little blocks that have impeded upon the courtyard. And it's meant that, you know, the original open courtyard feel has deteriorated quite substantially over that period of time. So this would be one of the things that would earmark for removal, so that we can reinstate, if you will, the look and feel of the building. There's asbestos sheeting and linings that need to be removed. You can also tell that here, which is something that we consider to be one of the most, let's say, heritage-sensitive elements of the building, which is the old walkways in wrought iron, are in quite a poor state of repair, in the sense that they've now also had to be propped up because of, they are quite literally collapsing. So for safety aspects, even though there's something that we're looking to remove and reinstate, currently they're in quite a dangerous, precarious position, if you will. We always come with a concept from an architectural perspective, what we want to do. So the overarching element that we'd like to reinstate here is the feel of that traditional courtyard which the dwellings are organized around. And then we have to look at what some of the technical challenges are behind that. So one of them is removing these layers. The other aspects is where certain elements of structure have deteriorated beyond meaningful repair, where we then have to look at removing and replacing, but wherever possible, obviously on a like-for-like basis. I mean, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, of course, is that we're inheriting buildings that are very, very old, and they were built with other requirements and regulations also in mind. So in reinstating these buildings for residential use after years of disrepair, we also have to ensure that we're making them apt for modern living and applying current building regulation requirements on that. As a heritage building, it was built, a long time ago with different requirements at that time. So bringing it up to date now means that you need to assess what is possible to do. In some cases, there are compromises that need to be had or discussions that need to be had. So you mentioned the example of fire, for instance. We need to understand how do we need to compartment the building, protect it so that it meets current requirements. Where are the nearest hydrant points, as a for instance? Where can a fire engine, in the event of an emergency, access up to in an area that was never envisaged for a vehicle to come up against? So, in the case of this development, we're talking about 3 blocks, only one of which is next to a road. The other 2 are along narrow, winding staircases that connect the upper town. So all of these aspects mean that, in general, we need to establish what there is currently, what is required in terms of bringing it up to speed, and if there's instances, as a for instance, accessibility. A modern building would normally have to have accessible entrances so that people who are disabled or wheelchair bound can safely and easily access the building. We're obviously trying to do that here, but by virtue of the fact that we are accessed from the public realm, from existing steps on different levels, mean that that's already a challenge in and of itself. So there are some compromises that need to be had in terms of how can you improve it in the context of what there is, whilst trying to preserve the historic buildings as well. We're within the second of the 2 courtyards, which is further away from Castle Road. And what this has, as you can probably appreciate, is a much narrower courtyard than is the case between the first 2 blocks. And what we're trying to do really is to respect this as an external space and to make it as attractive and appealing to the residences that are going to be existing adjacent to it as possible. So one of the aspects of this is that currently the access from the street and the access to the upper levels happens via this staircase here. And what we're trying to do here is, while still respecting the external walkways, is to place the staircase internally so as to free as much as possible this courtyard and make it as open and airy so that the residences that are facing it enjoy the best possible natural lighting and ventilation for the space. And that's been kind of a key driver of the design as well, to respect the traditional courtyards and walkways, but at the same time improve them as much as possible in terms of also opening it up to the urban realm beyond. What has to happen is that balance of trying to understand what the requirements are from lots of different angles. From an economic angle, from a logistical angle for the contractor who once gets on board, and trying to manage that also with the expectations of requirements of a body like the Heritage Trust, which wants to see the built heritage of Gibraltar preserved and improved upon. Specifically in terms of the old buildings, we kind of try to be pragmatic in terms of saying, well, what is it that we think is of essence in terms of their character? What are we trying to preserve? And how can we balance that with the challenges of making a building that is economically viable, as in how can we address things and make this building stack up in a way that will allow it to be refurbished and be reused. So here we're in the lowest floor of the middle of the 3 blocks, and what we've got here, unlike most of the other spaces, a very tall double height space with arched openings and very thick supporting walls that carry the structure of the whole building going upwards. I mean, this is one of several areas where, again, we're looking at wherever there's features, arches specifically, which tend to be on the lowest floors of these buildings. We're looking at maintaining, doing the process of the soft strip and demolitions that have started. We've also uncovered some of the old cisterns which weren't previously accessible. So those also have been cleared and will be integrated in terms of uses for the building themselves. And again, not just externally, but also internally, we're looking at preserving as much as possible the elements of the original building that give it that feel and character that we think needs to be preserved. And we're trying to incorporate this into the design and make use of this tall space with the arch still representing a feature. The same applies to external windows, where we're looking at reinstating all the existing openings, preserving their proportions and dimensions, really to get as much as possible a holistic approach that is sensitive to what the building would have been originally.
In the last few years, one of the most significant developments in the Old Town has been the restoration of the old police barracks. Now known as the Arches, these buildings have been restored, with many of the building's original features preserved, thereby retaining the character of the building and this area of Gibraltar's upper town.
So the police barracks were built, as I said before, in 1905 due to a need for a growing police force. The Royal Gibraltar Police was set up in 1831, I believe it was, and by 1871 they were taking on a lot more duties, policing duties, that the demands on the force were much greater, so they felt that they needed to bring people over and also employ more people. To relocate people to Gibraltar, you needed to bring their families with them. So these areas were seen as family areas. They brought up communities were brought up together, and even to this day, there are members of our community who grew up in these patios as children and have very fond memories. You know, their fathers, grandfathers were in the police force, and they still come up and remember very fondly their childhoods and family lives living and working in the area. This one in particular has always been associated with the old police barracks or the Arches next door, which were recently refurbished and really quite beautifully. The Arches themselves were built in 1905, but this building predates them. This building was then taken over by the police as they needed more accommodation for upcoming sergeants, inspectors and policemen.
The renewal of the Old Town, its buildings and social fabric, is an essential aim of the Gibraltar Heritage Trust. The Development and Planning Commission, with its duty to regularise and monitor development in Gibraltar, plays an essential role in this. Chaired by the town planner, the DPC is the forum in which interested parties such as property owners, developers, technical experts, town planners and NGOs such as the Gibraltar Heritage Trust can productively discuss the crucial points surrounding a development before ground is broken. These consultative interactions often happening in the concept stages of projects. Although invariably some unpopular decisions sometimes need to be made, it opens up the discussion to the public and mostly positively impacts the future landscape of Gibraltar by ensuring that the best possible outcomes are arrived at upon balance of all available facts.
I think I've been working in planning for 10 years. That's really where I started off as project coordinator. And if there's one thing that's very clear to me and the teams that I work with, is that dialogue is key. There is no point in going to the Development and Planning Commission because you've identified a site, thought of what you'd like to put in it, and then approach the DPC. In my opinion and in my experience, the way my projects roll out is if someone comes to me and they've identified a site, I typically have a feel for what heritage and the environment will want and won't want, but I still go talk to them and say, look, this is my vision, what's your vision, what do you need to see, what wouldn't you like to see? And then once that round robin has been affected, and once we've been and talked to all the different stakeholders, then we come up with the design, then we go and talk to them. And then I think it smooths out the process, and it means that we actually end up with a well-rounded project that people are proud of, rather than one that's been shoved down their throats, as has been the case in Gibraltar in the past.
You know, we as designers have our own ideas, and clients have their own ideas as well about how they would like to see a building addressed. But we need to engage with different entities, and the Heritage Trust is a very important one in the context of a building like this, to understand how we can go about this. So we try to have those discussions early doors so that everyone is really part of that process in terms of coming up with something that ticks lots of different boxes and agendas that are running in parallel to each other.
We've got a very good working relationship with many developers and contractors and architects in Gibraltar, particularly so with Jonas and Ghislaine and Citis. Really the planning process, and I keep saying it is a process, starts from very early on, and we always encourage developers and architects to come to speak to us at an early stage, which is precisely what they've done, and we've worked with them. I mean, they've always come back to us when they've hit a problem, as well as they've gone to the planners, to building control, to try and sort out any issues along the way that helps to make the recovery of this building possible, because there are many things that need to be taken into account, and a balance found that ticks all the boxes in terms of building control, planning issues, environmental issues, community issues, and of course heritage is where we're approaching it from.
So we as designers will come up with a concept of how we think the building could be addressed, but the key aspect of it at every stage is engaging with people and understanding how we can go about things. So we don't exist in a vacuum, and it's not us imposing our ideas on the general public and on clients and so on. It all comes as a result of discussions along the way. As an architect, obviously the aspect that I look at is very much from an aesthetic perspective, and you know, the visual character of a space that we're looking to preserve. So I think it's important to be pragmatic in the sense that we don't stop in time, and we can't just stick with buildings as they were 50 or 100 years or more ago, but rather that we're adding layers to it. But we need to look at adding these layers in a meaningful way, and that allows people to still interpret and appreciate where we're coming from. So I think that's really the aspect that we try to preserve in terms of heritage. But the heritage, in essence, goes way beyond just the physical manifestation, which is our buildings. So, but there's overlaps of this. So when restoring a building such as this and preserving, let's say, the visual appearance or aspects of that visual appearance which would have originally been in place, it's about how that contributes to the wider character and how society acts around this, and it generates spaces and ambiances which also have a sort of a social heritage aspect from a cultural perspective as well. It's an external part of the building, but again we can appreciate just generally how so many buildings here in the Old Town have suffered because of years of neglect or disuse. So this one specifically has been for whether 40 or 50 years without use. It's had issues with squatting and other elements that have caused the building to deteriorate further. You can see that there are some areas specifically where the structure is really collapsing, and it's had quite substantial issues that need to be addressed. So apart from anything as well, for the wider area, it's something that from a safety perspective needs to be looked at in order to improve the wider streetscape. Specifically what we're looking to do really is to reinstate the external appearance of the building, but sort of taking away some of the more recent layers that have been added to it over time, so that we can get a better feel of what this building would have originally looked like, and the heritage aspect that represents. It plays a key aspect as well in terms of it's a pathway into the upper town that is fallen into neglect and disuse by virtue of being adjacent to these derelict buildings. So when buildings like this get regenerated, get refurbished, it's a regeneration for the wider area, because it opens up urban pathways and it kind of promotes use and activity in areas which really have fallen outside of the general streetscape currently. And the end result, as I was saying before, is not just a building that stacks up in and of itself, but more widely, something that once implemented is a catalyst for improvement on the wider area. So we don't exist in isolation, we're another part of the jigsaw that is the upper town that is gradually being improved and refurbished and brought up to modern living standards.
I don't think you can pick out anything in particular about this building other than this building form is part of a whole, of the whole complex of the upper town. So when you start to lose individual buildings within that overall massing, you start to devalue and sort of like erode away the value of the old town. So every single building to the Heritage Trust is important to keep, not just in its form, but in its location and the history that it brings to the old town.
I work in a team, and it's not just the shareholders or myself, it's the excellent contractor and architect and the structure engineers. Our vision very much has been that we've got to preserve who we are in Gibraltar. And once this building is refurbished, and once there's families living here, this is what we want. We want to regenerate the old town. In a lot of large cities, a lot of the development plan involves building high-end residential and locally accessible residential stock. It means that you don't create ghettos. It means that you don't create areas of rich and poor or rich and less rich. You know, you start really mixing areas so that you get that community feel. When I talk about being from Gibraltar and people ask me to describe it, I say that it's unique, that it's a mixed match of cultures, that, you know, Jews, Muslims, Catholics, all types of Christians, we all live side by side. And my vision of heritage and my vision of Gibraltar is that we don't suddenly become Hong Kong with lots of high rises, that we have a mixture that reflects who we are as a people. So I mean, that's how I feel very strongly as a Gibraltarian. And that's why, you know, we've spent 2 years on this building, 2 years of costs, which we probably won't recover, just to get it right.
I think it's going to bring life back into the area. I mean, the old town, it is Gibraltar's old town. This is where people live, people work, and the buildings should be allowed to do that, do what they've been built for, house our people and our future generations.